Okay, so a question I frequently get asked is, why do I struggle in a half marathon? And there can be numerous different reasons for that. Um, so what we're going to do in this example is have a look through Michael's training to give a specific answer for him that may also give you some clues as to what you can improve with your own training. So what Michael had asked was, help. I run a half marathon but fell apart at mile 10. This always seems to happen for a reason. And what we're going to look at here is some race analysis first of all. Then we'll have a look at some of his training history before we discuss some more specifics around what training could happen, and then how we can build a bit of a plan to go with that. So we have a look at the race itself, the Milton Keynes Autumn Half Marathon from the 2nd of October 22. First of all, you can see that the course itself is rather twisty and turny. So that is always going to make it a little bit trickier. And if we scroll down and have a look at the course profile, obviously we've got that little drop down is coming out of Campbell Park. We've also got a climb up during that first third of the race, and another steeper but shorter climb in the last quarter that's going to make it a little bit more tricky as well. So using the graph and analysis of what actually happened, so we've got the profile of the course at the bottom here. Above that we've got the pace. Above that we've got heart rate, and at the top we've got Michael's cadence. So what we can see is that the pace itself was pretty steady, but at that, just after that 9 kilometer mark, something happened. So we've got a small drop in the overall pace. The big drops here are when there's short walking breaks. A small drop in the overall pace. At the same time, heart rate, which was reasonably steady, starts to fluctuate a little bit more. And we had a drop in the cadence at that point as well. Okay. By halfway mark, we've obviously had that little bit of walk, and we can see that we're starting to get a much more increased heart rate. The cadence is dropping slightly more, and that pace, ignoring the walking breaks, just stayed quite steady there. But the indication really is that by the time we get to the 10-mile mark, which actually we could say that the wheels were falling off just after that halfway point where the little walking break there, before the climbing started. Another thing, which if we look at the actual breakdown of the pace, which is showing it per mile rather than per kilometre, in terms of the distance with the breakdowns there, but that pace, so we can see we've got 5:24, 5:11, they're all kind of around that below 5, they're around 5:30-ish, and then just before halfway we get that drop to over 6 minutes, and most of them were then over 6 minutes a kilometre. So that very definite drop in the pace by halfway there as well. The other thing to take into account to this, which kind of gets discussed with the training history as well, is that pace. So if we look at that pace in the first, just over the first third or so, that pace is on average faster than a recent parkrun PB that Michael had recorded. So looking at the overall, so what we can say from that is that actually we might have started off just possibly perhaps a little bit too quick. And what I suggest that is that actually knowing the course in advance can make a big difference, because then you can train specifically around that. So looking at the history, we'll only go back to June. And we've got most weeks there's 2 runs. Occasionally we've got a third run. Now, doing 3 runs a week will, assuming they're quality runs, will have a better impact in terms of the overall training response. But you don't have to. You can get away with 2 runs. And in terms of those longest runs, well, we've done one 16k, so 10 mile, two longer runs, longest run. So maybe take into account that 15 there as well. So it's not as if we're really short on overall distances. Obviously, some weeks have only run once, but then we could class those as being recovery weeks. We've also got what we can see is on those longest runs that actually, as we got close to the race, the average speed was picking up most of the time as well. And the average speed kind of a bit more varied, but hasn't been changed a huge amount on the fastest runs. Okay, but it is quite important to take into account that we have got those increased speeds. So in other words, the longest runs have become more and more intense on most of those weeks. And we also have the biggest mileage, as you can see here, was in that week before the race itself. And that is far from ideal. So we had, in fact, we had 3 runs, and 2 of them were quite long and reasonably quick. So that 11k there, so that's even faster than the race pace. So in effect, there's some changes we can make there in terms of having maybe a couple of extra longer runs, but also not backloading that mileage right at the end there, which means that going into the race, Michael was already fatigued. So what can we do to improve on that in the future? Well, having some more specific training is always going to be very useful. In other words, the long ones are fine, but doing some hill training, knowing full well that that course is hilly. Of course, easy to say in retrospect. If you didn't look at the course in advance, you wouldn't know. But knowing there's those hills in there would mean that you could then start planning in some hill training as part of the overall running plan. Also, there wasn't a specific running plan being followed. Having that plan, you get some more structure. And it also means that when there's other races involved, so in this case, we had a race 2 weeks out. Now, with that 8k 5 mile race there, again, pretty quick, similar in pace actually to the parkrun PB that had been recorded only a couple of months earlier. But if we've got that race already planned in, we could then say, well, that would be the last hard run, so we'd have the longer run as being the week before that here, rather than actually having the race and then having a much longer run the week after. So by having a running plan, we can build some of the other racing into that, and also ensuring that we've got some more uphill running and more of a structured increase in the long runs. So we get a bit more used to running close to those distances. Like I said, we don't actually for a half marathon need to go up to the half marathon distance. Yeah, yes, it can have a benefit, but that depends on how much time you're willing to put into the training as well. So if you're running twice a week, really, it's not necessary. So we know that Michael's more than capable of running the half marathon. It's in making sure that we get some more specific training pace in there and making sure that those longer runs stay easy.